welcome everybody to Illuminate, Navigate, Radiate, a journey of emotional resilience. I'm your host, Brandon, and here with another journey segment today. Have a great artist for you today and to share her experiences and her journey through life. And I think we'll get some really good tidbits of different types of experiences and kind of chasing your dream through some different rough things in life with our guest today. And so welcome, Alexa. How you doing today?
Hi, I'm good.
Awesome. Well, thank you for taking the time and doing this and being willing to share, some of your different experiences in life.
Of course, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I'm glad we were able to work it out and I'm looking forward to, you've given me a little bit of information about where you come from and what you've been through. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing more about that and how you've ended up where you've ended up. And I think it's always awesome when somebody chases their dream and they're living it out. So I love that aspect of your story as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so just kind of jumping into it, where do you see the importance of sharing your experiences and having that conversation about what you've been through and those different challenges you faced on your way?
I feel like it's important to share your stories because when I've always been in the midst of everything bad going on in my life, it's always felt like it was only happening to me. And this is like a singular experience that only I have ever experienced because I hadn't heard anybody struggle with the same things. And so I think it's very important to share so that other people don't think that they're all alone and that it's just them and why me? You know what I mean? A little bit of teamwork, kind of like, oh, okay, you went through this. This is how you got through it. Maybe I can do it too.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think that's the biggest thing about sharing is because, when I was in my darkest moments, dealing with some really tough stuff, that's what I felt too. I'm all alone. I'm worse off than anybody else. Nobody's ever, experienced this like I've experienced this before. So there's no hope for me. And I think when people share those experiences and people share those journeys, it gives hope in a lot of different ways, whether it's you can relate on emotions or you can relate on backgrounds or you can just find some way to relate. It just gives you that little bit of hope to get through to the other side of that struggle. So I think that's a wonderful way to view it and just kind of, looking at your story and looking at your journey, what did that look like for you growing up?
In what specific aspects?
Oh, so I'm sorry. Just like in the way of, did you face mental health challenges early on, or was it something that kind of came later on in life?
So I've had issues with like mental health my whole life. I grew up in a really abusive household. My stepfather was not nice to me because I was the only kid in the house that wasn't his. And so it's always been a struggle with anxiety. And I feel like that stems from always having to be perfect and always worrying about, oh, is this going to make him upset? Is this going to trigger something? So that anxiety is still really within me. Like, I still think about it all the time. And, like, is this person mad at me because I did this little thing? Like, it's just constant in my head. And then the depression, too, of, like, dang, I'm not good enough. I'm not one of his sons. I'm not ever going to be that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and like when you were experiencing that, how early in your life do you remember experiencing that? Like those feelings of not good enough and those feelings of like, oh, I can't mess up or it's gonna upset him or maybe somebody else as well.
Some of my earliest memories, honestly, I was probably around like 5 or 6 when I first started like understanding that I wasn't necessarily like a part of the family. And it was because I switched schools. And when I got to school, my mom always told me that like my last name was the same as my brother's and as hers and as her husband's. And then when I got to school, they had a little name tag for me on my desk. And they were like, yeah, you sit here. And I was like, that's not my name. Like, you guys have the wrong last name there. And they're like, no, this is on all your sheets. This is on everything. because for the longest time she told me that he was my father too. And so that's what started all of it and kind of brought it out, was me figuring that out. And then he kind of went on a tangent, and ever after that point, it was always, well, you're not my kid. I don't give a fuck. You're not my child. Like, all this other stuff. It was insane.
That's a lot to deal with at such a young age, is having somebody say that. And not only that, but finding out that way, or like having that moment in public in front of your peers. I think especially around that age, I think that's when we really started to realize like our peers, and the way we want them to think about us, or the way we want to be seen in public. And so that's a really tough thing to go through at such a young age.
And then shortly after that, he was diagnosed with cancer. And it kind of just spiraled from there, because he was mad at the world. He was mad at everyone around him for his cancer diagnosis. He blamed my mother. He's like, you gave me cancer. I didn't have cancer before I met you. Like, all this other stuff. Just because she was pushing him to go get tested. Because she saw the signs and she was like, you need to go in. You need to figure this out. Like, there's something seriously wrong with you. And after that, he just blamed it on my mother. He blamed it on me, and just took it out on us for like the next 7 years that he was going through chemo and everything, because he wasn't working. All he could do was sit at home and be upset. I feel like in a lot of situations like that, where you go through something where like you face your own mortality, a lot of people either become bitter from it, or they get like a new lease on life, like, oh wow, I have a chance. And he settled into that like bitterness in a way.
Yeah, no, just being in some different moments in my life where I wasn't really sure if I was going to make it out, that's so true of, you start going through a whole lot of different things in your head, and there's a lot of different things you can embrace in those moments, and it makes it really, really tough. And then to be a young kid in that type of environment, already having those different conflicting feelings, like I could just imagine that adds to what you're dealing with. As did you talk to your mom or anybody else about that as you got older, like about those feelings that you were having and that anxiety or depression? Like, were you able to let that out in some way when you were younger?
So it continued like that up until I was about 13 or 14. And I actually attempted to commit suicide around that age. And I was checked into a mental facility out in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I was checked into Pine Rest for a while. And so I went through inpatient for about, I want to say it was like 12 to 14 days. I can't quite remember. And then I was outpatient for about 2 months, just trying to get like on the correct medications and all of that. I was also diagnosed with anxiety, depression, and manic bipolar disorder while I was there. That kind of, but it really helped going to that facility, because I was able to understand what I was going through. And they were able to like teach coping mechanisms and all of that, because I had never even heard of a coping mechanism before I went in there. I was like, what is that? But even like the stuff that I learned in there, it wasn't a pleasant experience, but it definitely still helps me to this day, like with coping with my anxiety and all of that.
Yeah, I mean, going through that at such a young age, like feeling like there's no other way out besides that is so heartbreaking, because it's just, I feel like that's gotten worse and worse in our society, and it happens at younger and younger ages, is like people feel that intense of emotions that that's their only way out. What was that? What was being there like for you at 13? Being in like the patient part of it when you weren't at home. Like, was your mom there a lot? Were you like by yourself most of the time? What was that experience like of coming out of that really dark moment and then trying to grasp back onto life?
It was honestly, it was insane because it's a children's unit. And so there's all different, like there was kids as young as like 11 in there. And then there were kids who were about to be transferred into the adult system. They're like 17, about to turn 18. So it was a lot of crazy experiences. There were kids in there for a lot worse issues than what I had going on. And so when I got in there, I was like, wow, these people are actually kind of crazy. And I'm just really sad. But it was very interesting being in there. I didn't want to leave after a while just because it felt safe. Just because, and I expressed this to my mom when she came in because they had regulated visits where like they would come in and they would speak to the therapists and they would speak to like the doctors and everything about like what I was going through there and what they were learning about me. And even towards the end of it, I was in there so long because they didn't feel like I was going home to a safe place. And I didn't feel like I was going home to a safe place. Just because of like all the abuse and everything that was going on at home. But once I got out, it did get a little bit easier because I feel like there was more eyes on me. Like everybody was in my family too, because it got out in our family. They were like, okay, like there's actually something wrong with Alexa. Like we don't know what's going on at home, but there's something wrong with her. And so like my grandma was more present in my life. My aunts and my uncles were more present in my life. And so I had more escapes once I got out of the facility. So it was a lot easier to transition back into the real world, but it still was hard with stigma as well going back to school. Because everyone was like, oh my gosh, like this is the crazy girl. She was just put into a mental institution. Like there's something wrong with her. So it like perpetuated bullying at school. So it was a little bit harder in some aspects, but easier in others.
When you went back, was that middle school or high school?
That was middle school.
Middle school. Oh, middle school's rough too. kids are
It was
kids are
great.
mean. What was? Did you face a lot of bullying for people knowing about that?
Yeah. I was bullied prior to that already. I was kind of like an odd kid out. In general, I'm not a very social person. I didn't make friends easily. I was always drawing. I was always just kind of doing my own thing or like hang out with my brothers. I would never like socialize too much. So people thought that I was weird because I would dress like a boy with all like my brother's hand-me-downs. And like I didn't care about makeup, I didn't care about hair, I didn't care about like all of like the normal girl things. And so I was ridiculed for that beforehand. And then afterwards, I was ridiculed for the suicide attempt and the self-harming and all of that.
Yeah,
It was
and you said it was a little bit easier because you had more eyes on you. Was that a really helpful thing, having more people know about it, just because there's more people that maybe you could lean on, go to, or talk to about it? Because I know, like, even when I was older and I started using hard drugs, like I didn't want people to know about it, but when I hid that and I isolated myself more, it just kind of made it worse, because then I wasn't telling anybody what was really going on with me, and that makes it hard in itself. So like, did you feel like a little bit of relief in that, of like, oh, I don't have to hide this, or I don't have to carry it by myself, but I can actually go and talk to some people that know what's happening with me?
a little bit because nobody understood the extent of what was going on in our house. Nobody, they just understood like, oh, Alexa has depression and anxiety. And it's something that even some of my family is still learning about. Like my grandma was recently here in California on vacation and we were talking about it and she was like, I just wish you would have told me when you were a kid. I wish you would have told me that was going on. I would have gotten you out of that situation. But a lot of people who come from homes of abuse, like that's one of the first things that you learn is like you don't talk about what goes on in your house. You don't tell people what's going on. So people knew on like a surface level what was going on, so it's easier to explain like my sadness and my anxiety, but I couldn't necessarily tell anybody why that was happening. Everybody was just like, oh, she's just emotional. She's sensitive. But
That's, yeah, I was just gonna say that's you. What advice would you like? Just looking back at that, and if you see a child that is dealing with depression, anxiety, like is is there a way to have a conversation to have them open up about what's going on and keeping them that way, or is it so hard to do that it's hard to even like give some advice to trying to do that?
it's really hard to, as a child in that situation, it's hard to come out and speak up
Hmm.
because those are your parents. That's your home. That's where you're supposed to rely on people and feel the safest. And depending on how early it starts, it's normal. You don't think that there's anything abnormal about what's going on in your home. You just think, oh, okay, dad gets mad sometimes and stuff gets thrown or like people get hit or something. Like that's normal. That's fine. Everybody deals with that. And then once you find out that not everybody is dealing with that, the embarrassment sets in. And so if I had advice for kids that are going through that right now, I'd tell them that it's okay to speak up. There is somebody out there that is ready to help you and they're waiting to help you. There's a ton of programs. All you have to do is say something to somebody at school. There was plenty of times when I was at school and I would be hiding bruises or like running and going and like crying in the bathroom or lashing out at people. And if I would have just spoke up at school, even because they're mandated reporters, they have to say something. If I would have just spoken
Hmm.
up at some point, then I wouldn't have gone through a lot of what I went through. But
Yeah,
it
and
can't feel comfortable enough to do that, and that's the hardest part.
yeah, and even like kids know what to say to not get reported, right? And I worked in a bunch of schools the last like 6 7 years, and I would go in and just talk about life basically, and different mental health things, and some would be in big groups, some would be one-on-one with students, and some students would like even before that conversation they'd be like, are you going to tell somebody about what we're going to talk about, or are you gonna report this? Because depending on what I said, that would change how they started to talk to me. That would change, like the way they worded things or what they would go into. And like you just said, it's almost like it's a normal thing, or it becomes so ingrained in you that it's just part of your life. Even once you realize that it's not normal, it's just it is what it is, right? Like you just said, your home's supposed to be safe, and you don't want to get your parents or family members in trouble, so it makes it really hard to open up.
And even another aspect of it is like, no matter, I was told this by an actual CPS worker, no
Mhm.
matter the level of abuse or the level of neglect, a kid is still going to love their parents, no matter what. So that's another thing that's hard for kids to speak up is like, yeah, they're doing this, but I love them. That's my dad or that's my mom. And
I
that
think that's an important thing to remember too for any adult in those types of jobs or environments. Like it's not easy to to say something negative about somebody you love, especially if you know it's gonna lead to something a little bit. But no, I think that's really good advice, and just I really appreciate your perspective in that, because I think that's such a difficult part about today's world and school and and kids feeling alone and then ending up, like you had said, you had tried taking your own life and being in those really dark places. So I think the more people can talk about that and just give different insights to how that looks is great. So I really appreciate you, talking about that a little bit more. Um, did you develop any negative coping skills? Did you have any negative things that that you got into or that started hurting your life in other aspects?
100%. I'm I'm a completely different person now than before I had my son.
Mm,
Before I got pregnant around 18 and then I had my
hmm.
son at 19, but before that I was never that kid in school that was like at the house parties drinking and like doing all that. I was the kid that was in the corner tripping balls, like off of Molly or ecstasy or acid or any of that stuff. Like that was my main coping mechanism for the longest time, was just drugs. Like I didn't value my own life because it didn't feel like anybody else valued it at that point. And so I was just doing anything to escape. And I'm sure like you understand, being like a recovering heroin addict, like you just want to get out of your own body. You want to get out of the space that you're in. You want to get out of your head. And so every weekend I would be doing acid or doing coke or doing whatever I would decided to do that weekend. And then just working my ass off tattooing every day, and then not sleeping and going and doing that. I would just make myself so drugged out and busy that I couldn't think about how upset I was or what I was going through.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest reason we use drugs, right? I mean, sometimes I think we can get into them when it's because you can have fun on them. But I remember the first time I got high and drunk, I was just like, oh, I don't have to be in my own head anymore. I don't have to feel this internal pain. I don't have to deal with these racing thoughts. I don't have to, struggle with myself. I can be the life of the party. I can be outgoing. Because I was that same way. I was very introverted, and I always felt too self-conscious to talk to people or to interact with people. And when I got high, I didn't feel like that anymore. So I fell in love with that type of lifestyle and those choices really early in my life. And so, yeah, kind of going back into to the tattooing aspect of it. You had mentioned you would draw a lot when you were younger. So where did that love start creeping in, and did that become a positive outlet for you at different moments?
Yeah, so when I was little, my mom said I've been drawing since I could pick up a crayon. I've been drawing something. And then when I was in the hospital for my suicide attempt, they taught me that one of our coping skills could be art. And so that became one of my main outlets when I was in there, and then when I got out as well. And then just the tattooing, I kind of fell into it a little bit. Like, because my mother was always in shops and taking me in there, and I became obsessed with it. Like, when I first started doing tattoos, I was probably like 12, 13, and I would take sewing needles, like, from sewing kits in my mom's craft room, and I would go get, like, pen ink, and I would just be sitting, and I would just be tattooing myself with a sewing needle, just poking, and hiding them, and, like, I would tattoo, like,
Would
all
that
the
would that
kids.
stay on your skin for a long time doing it like that, or would it like eventually go away?
It depends on how deep you go. So I did have a few
Okay.
that faded away, but I have had to cover a couple of them.
Yeah.
But
Well,
when
I was
I was
just curious, but yeah, go ahead.
around freshman year in high school, I was friends with all of the seniors because one of the seniors was my neighbor.
Hmm.
And so one of them bought me a tattoo kit off of Amazon. And my only rule was that I had to tattoo her whenever she wanted to get tattooed. And so I just kind of progressed from there. And when we moved out here to California, I was about 16, and that's when it really became like a heavy coping mechanism for me.
Hmm.
It was because we moved out here because I was a very, very troubled kid. I was getting in all types of problems when I was living in Michigan, just hanging out with the wrong people. And when we moved out here, it was within a week. Like, I ended up on the news for running away. And you're from Michigan, so you understand, like, it's a big state, but it's small. Like,
Yeah.
a lot of people know each other, like, you know your neighbors, all of that. So when I ended up on the news, it was like a social disgrace for my mom.
Mm-hmm.
And she really, like, she was also worried about, like, my health. She was worried that I was going to end up dead or in jail somewhere. And so we moved out here within a week of me being on the news. And to the middle of Stockton, California, where there is nothing. Didn't know anybody, had no family. I wasn't even enrolled in school yet. I was out of school for 2 months because it was such like a quick move and she hadn't gotten all the paperwork situated. and she was working a full-time job, so I was just stuck in the apartment all day, every day, with nothing to do, no TV, no Wi-Fi, nothing. So I would just be drawing and painting the whole time. And that really became like my social coping mechanism for like not having friends or having family around. And around that same time at 16, I was just so bored. I went and got my apprenticeship at a shop. I was like, I need to do something. I'm going crazy. And that's kind of just spiraled from there. I've worked in tattoo shops ever since then.
That's really awesome. I mean, it's crazy how you ended up in that, situation. I don't know if, California might give you more options, for something like that than Michigan. So it's kind of crazy how sometimes that works out. But um, what was that reaction to ending up on the news for running away? Was your mom already planning on moving, or was that like, oh, we're leaving now?
It was more like, oh, we're leaving now, because it didn't start off as me being a runaway. It started off
Mhm.
as it was missing white girl syndrome. There,
Mhm.
I had, like I told you, my home was really abusive, so it had been really, really bad that night, and I packed my bag and I jumped out my window. But it's also the middle of winter in Michigan.
It's a
So
great time to run away.
exactly, the footprints. The footprints. But I had to double back for something because I forgot something and I can't remember what it was, but there were two sets of tracks. And so my mom immediately thought, she was like, oh my God, somebody kidnapped her. Because she didn't think, she knew about our home situation. She was going through all the same stuff. But she didn't think that I would leave because of it. She didn't think that I'd have the balls to run away. So she immediately thought I was kidnapped. There was a search party and everything. My grandma was on a vacation out of the state, and she flew back to find me. Yeah.
How long were
All
you
thought,
gone for?
48 hours.
Okay.
And it ended with my mom finding out where I was hiding at my friend's house, coming and breaking down his door and dragging me out of there after beating him up. He dragged me out of there. The police were waiting at my house with my dad. And my dad was screaming at them. He was like, you need to take her to juvie. You need to take her to juvie. She needs to learn a lesson. Because my dad was in the prison system for a little bit. And so after that, when he was in there, he found God. And so he thought that that was like the thing to fix everything. Like, oh, she just needs to go in there and she'll be fine. She just needs to get some, what's the word I'm looking for? She just needs to learn how to act, basically. And so, yeah, after that, my mom, she was like, I can't take this anymore. Like, when I was doing acid and LSD every weekend, I would, at the height of my trip, I would think I was dying. And so I would call her and I'd be like, hey, mom, I need you to tell me I'm not dying really quick. Like, I need you to snap me out of this. And so she was getting like drug-induced calls from me. She was getting calls from the neighbors that I was sneaking out all the time and like going to boys' houses and all this. And so me running away was very much the last straw for her. She had no intention of moving before that. Especially to Stockton, California, but she put in for a job transfer the next day after I was on the news, and the only place that they could transfer her to was here. So they paid for us to move everything.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's wild though. Like just having that happen and changing it so quick. Were you in the mindset of like this move will be really good for me, or were you pissed that you were moving?
I was angry the whole 35-hour drive here.
Yeah.
It was so bad. Like, and for the 2 weeks leading up to the move, because we knew for about a week or two that we were gonna go, she, like, I was just hating her. Like, I didn't speak to her at all. Like, I was just so upset, like, packing my boxes, super mad, just, like, throwing everything in there. I did not think it was going to be a good thing, but I definitely agree with her in the long run that
Mhm.
I would not be in the place that I'm at right now if I didn't move. I would have ended up a drug addict, like continuously instead of getting sober, or I would have ended up in like some dead end job that like everybody else in my hometown is doing. So
Mhm.
I'm very fortunate that she made that choice for me, because even though I didn't like it at the time, it definitely paid off.
Yeah. No, and that's, I think, obviously we don't realize those things in those moments, especially when we're younger. But when we can look back and see how that led to something amazing in our life, it kind of makes sense, and we maybe can laugh at it a little bit more than we could in that moment. So kind of going back now to being in California and getting your apprenticeship and things like that. Were you like, did your mental health go down or up when you went out there? So like when you got out there, were you feeling better about things as you got that apprenticeship, or was it still kind of hard because maybe you were still kind of by yourself and not, with maybe other friends or family members? Like what was that experience like of kind of adjusting mentally and new coping skills and a new lifestyle when you got out there?
I was still very much depressed. For the first couple months of my apprenticeship, it changed. I was really happy for a little bit because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm doing my dream job. Everything's happening. Like, I've been waiting for this. But the tattoo industry is very harsh, especially on women. I was hazed. I was emotionally abused. I was like forced to run nonsensical errands 24/7 or just running amok. I was in high school at the time, so I was only 16.
Hmm.
And my mentors, they would call me while I was at school and they would be like, if you don't leave school right now and get here, you're fired. Like, just a ton of crazy stuff like that. So it made me a little bit happy because I was able to do what I wanted to do. But there were definitely times where I was at such a low point that I was like, do I even want to do this anymore? Like, if these are the people that I'm going to be working with, or all these, like, people who are so mean and, like, just, like, nonsensical, like, I can't wrap my brain around why I would want to be a part of an industry like this. I'm really happy I held on, though, because not everybody was like that. And a lot of those people that I worked with, they aren't doing this anymore. They're not even tattooing at this. So it's worth it to stick it out.
What was something that got you through some of those doubts, like some of those moments where you're like, do I want to do this? Do I want to be a part of this? What was something or some things that like kind of pulled you through it a little bit and got you to where you could find that energy again to keep going?
My mom. Definitely
Mm.
my mom. She, and not in like a, oh, sweet baby honey, you can do
Yeah.
this. Not in that kind of way. My mom is very, very strict. She is a hard ass to the core. Every time I would come home crying from my apprenticeship, like, I want to quit. I'm going to go in tomorrow and quit. Like, I can't do this. She'd be like, I didn't raise a quitter. This is what you wanted forever, isn't it? And I'm like, yeah. She would be like, then don't quit. Why are you going to give them the satisfaction of you quitting? Walk in there tomorrow, hold your head high, and get your shit done. And that's kind of been my attitude towards everything ever since then. It's just like, if they can do it, I can do it. How am I going to let them try to beat me down? I can do this. It's more of like a stubbornness.
Mm. Hey, sometimes that works.
Exactly. I'm too
Sometimes
stubborn.
that's what, yeah. Sometimes that's what gets us through those really tough moments is that stubbornness to not want to give it up.
And that she would
Especially for
always
something like that.
say, oh, sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
Another thing that she always says is, it can't be bad forever. Eventually things have to get better. Eventually things have to turn around. You just have to wait it out. You just gotta wait it out. So that was like another aspect that kind of kept me going, was it can't be like this forever. It's gonna be good eventually if I just wait and I just work hard and I do what I need to do. I'll figure it out.
Yeah, and looks like you're doing that right now. But when you were so as you went through that, you had mentioned earlier that you had your son at 19.
Yep.
So what was what was that experience like for you? Was it something that you were really excited for? Something that was like you? I mean, I became a dad at 29 and I was terrified as hell. So I can't imagine, 18, 19. But what was that experience like on just you personally knowing that everything was about to change?
It was terrifying. I mean, I was just a kid. Like, at 25, I look at 18, 19-year-olds, and I'm like, oh my God, how did I do that? Like, you guys are
Hmm.
children. This is crazy. But it forced me to be better. Before I had my son, I was smoking cigarettes, 2 packs a day at the most, but still smoking nonstop. I was doing coke heavily. I was doing psychedelics heavily. Like, I was just partying all the time. I didn't care about myself. I didn't care about what I was putting into my body or what I was putting out into the world even. But after I found out that I was pregnant, I didn't even plan on keeping him at first because I was so young. I was like, I need to think this through. I need to figure out what I'm going to do. Like, because this is real life. Like, I'm a grown up now. I need to figure this out. And from the day I found out I was pregnant, not even knowing how I was going to keep him, I quit everything cold turkey. I quit smoking cigarettes. I quit doing coke. I quit doing everything because as a mother and somebody carrying a child, I felt that the least I could do for this person that I'm bringing into the world is give them a good head start and chance at life. Your health is your first chance at life. If I put all these toxins into my body and I'm doing all this crazy stuff, like, he's going to be born losing. And I can't. I've seen a lot of my family and people around me continue to do like drinking and smoking and everything while they're pregnant, and my cousins and my other, like, my friends' kids, like, they come out with these problems, and it's all because the mother couldn't show restraint. And I didn't want to be that. I didn't want to cause that kind of harm to somebody that you can't change. And so my son, getting pregnant with him was honestly the best thing that ever happened to me. Even though it was terrifying at the time, it really made me lock in and decide who I wanted to be with my life.
Yeah. Was that something that just like clicked, or like the fact of just like quitting everything? Like, was it just a flip that switch and you were like, yeah, I'm not doing this anymore? Or was it like was it kind of like a battle of like, I can't do this, but I kind of want to, but I've seen the results of what happens when you do this. Was it that process, or was it just like, done?
I tried to keep it like a light switch. Like, I definitely didn't go back to doing any of that stuff, but it's
Hmm.
something I struggled with mentally. Like, even
Oh
to
yeah,
this,
yeah.
like, I'm sure as a recovering addict, you understand too, like, no matter how recovered you are or how long it's been since you've done something, you're always going to want that. Like, I still want to do all of these things all the time. I know I can't. But it was definitely like a really big struggle and hard to come to terms with for the longest time. Like, wow, like, everything is completely different now. Because my whole personality before him was, I was that girl who always had the drugs at the party. I was that
Mhm.
girl who's always doing something crazy and making crazy decisions and getting myself into bad situations. And so I had to completely reinvent myself and figure out who I am without the drugs. Who am I without the crazy people surrounding me? Who am I on the inside?
And that's for me, that was such an uncomfortable thing. It still is actually a little bit to sit here without being high. Even though I've been clean and sober for almost 9.5 years now. It was such a big part of me for so long. Like, I completely relate to what you just said of like, that was my identity. If people wanted drugs, if people wanted to party, like, they come to me, whether it was in my hometown, whether it was, when I moved to any city, whether it was on the, college campus when I was in school. That was me. And so, like, when you identify as that, right? That's what I identified as. And it was so, it was like a, yeah, it was like a grieving process, giving that up. of like, even though it was negative and it was a bad thing and it wasn't good for me, and I knew the change I was making was going to be positive, it's still, like I said, even to this day, sometimes it's still a really hard thing to like let go of and sit in your own thoughts and feelings and sit with your emotions and sit with those all in a clear state of mind and fully being able to feel those. And so like, just, I really relate to that fact of having to give something up and that struggle of kind of moving past it. So as you went through that and had your son, and still was going through that growing process, when was the time like the tattooing thing really started to take off for you?
Um, I always tell people I've been tattooing for over 10 years, but I've been good for 5.
That's a good way. That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, because tattooing, it's very trial and error and like learn as you go. So you're only going to get better if you're continuously working at it.
Mhm.
And honestly, after having my son, that's when it started getting better. Was because I wasn't on these drugs all the time and I wasn't like starving myself and sleep depriving myself. It was a lot easier. My work definitely got a lot better. But just recently, I feel like is when all my stuff has been really blowing up. I did a tattoo convention a couple months ago. And
Okay.
ever since then, my following on social media has doubled. My interactions have doubled. It's been insane. It's the imposter syndrome is starting to set in a little bit.
Why? How so? How does that feel for you? That imposter syndrome about what you're doing?
Um, it's just because in the moment when I'm doing my tattoos or I'm filming my reels or doing all my stuff for social media, like I know that it's me in that moment that's doing like these cool things and these awesome things
Mhm.
that I think are awesome and I think are cool. And then I go and I put them into the world and I put them on social media. And when they do super, super good, I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't deserve this. Why is everybody giving me all this attention? Or like, I'll go out and go to like a tattoo event out here or like hang out with some of my artist friends. And they're just all praising me, telling me how good of a job I've done or like I'm doing. But I think it all kind of stems back to like not feeling good enough. Like, even with all this praise and all these great things that are happening around me, it just doesn't feel like I deserve it. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
so
Well, I
that's
mean,
imposter syndrome is like, sometimes it doesn't feel like I deserve all of the things that are happening.
yeah, and even just with you explaining that little bit, you hear some of that from what you were talking about in the beginning of when you were little and those things you were feeling um in life. So have you found different ways yet to say to yourself, no, I do deserve this and it is because I'm good at what I do, and like there's a reason I'm getting this praise? Have you had those moments to where like you can genuinely say that and feel that for yourself?
It honestly depends on the day. Like,
Mm.
with manic bipolar disorder that I have, it's really really high highs and like really really low lows. There's like never an in between. And I've been off of my medications for the past few years just because they make me feel kind of like a zombie. Like, instead of getting really 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 highs and really 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 lows, you're like monotoned all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You don't get the opportunity to feel anything else. And I didn't really like that. But coping with all of this and like trying to figure out a way that I do deserve it in those low points is really hard. That's when I have to lean on my friends and my mom and have somebody around to be like, no, like you're doing the right thing. You're going where you need to go. You're putting in the work. You did all of this. You put over 10 years into this. You deserve this. And so sometimes it just takes other people to put it into perspective for me. But then other days when I'm on those highs, I'm like, I am God. I'm the best person that's ever tattooed ever. And it just hits a little bit differently. But my mom has so many quotable moments. But when I'm in those high points, I try to remember so I don't seem cocky, because I try not to be like, there's always somebody doing more than you. There's always somebody who's better than you. There's always somebody who's putting in more hours than you. And so I've found ways to like humble myself in both positions, thankfully.
Yeah, no, that's a really positive thing, and and I like that you also took it to those moments where you're like, oh yeah, I am better than everybody, and how to kind of bring that down a little bit, because that's, it just creates that balance for us, because it becomes really hard to maintain that those swings, right? Like when you're going from really high to really low, and you're missing out on that balance or that middle aspect of it. Like it becomes so intense and stressful and exhausting. Like it's a really good thing to find those balancing points of how to kind of to keep it going in that way. Do you have, and I'm just curious now, like not taking medication, um, do you have different things that you that you see coming? Like, can you see an episode coming, whether it's going to be really high or you're going to start heading low, and you can prep for that a little bit? Or is it still kind of throw you off guard more often than not?
Um, Most of the time, I can see it coming. Thankfully, that really helped when I was in the institution and they were like going over with everything with me, because I didn't even know what bipolar disorder was. I didn't even know like what symptoms were, like what to look out for. Like when I'm going into my low points, it starts with being angry. I'm just really upset and I'm really angry for no reason, and understanding that it's for no reason and I need to catch myself and I need to calm down is like a huge part of it. It's harder for me to regulate my low times than my high times. It's hard to get out of that pit. When I'm feeling like that, I try to like work out. I try to like go to the gym. That's the easiest way to build serotonin and the healthiest way for me, rather than like trying to like do drugs or something. Like the gym is something I relied on to like boost that
That's a
serotonin.
much better option.
Exactly. Or like if I'm really, really sad and I know something's coming on, I'll do my makeup and I'll dress nice and kind of live by that phrase, you look good, you feel good, kind of a thing. So I try to get out of the low times, but the high times, those are easier to see coming and easier to like kind of regulate. Like when I was younger and I would go through my high times, like that's when I was doing all the craziest stuff. I'd be like, oh yeah, I can definitely go 4 hours away from my house in the middle of the night and go to this crazy party. Totally, why not? Or like freaking when I broke my arm last year in Pismo, like I was on one of my bipolar highs and I was like, I'm like the master at riding this quad. I'm gonna be fine. I got this. And obviously I did not have that. I fell, but I try to ride the high times, but ride them safely. And catch myself from being like, no, you don't need to go do this crazy stuff right now. You can be happy and stay in the house and focus on your work.
Yeah, I really like that. I think that's a really good perspective or piece of advice that is ride them, but ride them safely. I think that's a really good tidbit right there of how to handle those situations. Because I mean, that was like whenever I think I partied harder when I was actually feeling good and when I wanted to celebrate, because then I deserved everything I deserved all the drinks I was taking and all the drugs I was doing. Like, oh yeah, I did something good. Now I could really go. And so it's just interesting how our mind like does that to us as we're going through those things. So since you've gone through and have had some of these successes, you found different ways to cope with with the mental health challenges that you face, have you had any like really tough moments where even though you have this good stuff going on, you're becoming more and more successful in tattooing, you're a mom to your son, you're figuring out different ways to deal with this stuff or more positive ways to deal with it. Have you had any really tough moments that were harder than usual to get out of in that period of time that you've had?
100%. Honestly, last year was one of the hardest years of my life. I did not think I was going to make it through last year at all. So last year, around April, I was at work and I had just put the stencil on somebody. And if for people who don't understand what that is, it's like the sticky thing that we put on you that has the design before we actually do the tattoo. So you put it in the right placement and all of that. So I put the stencil on this girl. And then I carried my son's car seat 3 blocks and put it in his aunt's car. I loaded him up in the car and I got back to the shop and I had a heart attack in the middle of my workday. Just randomly had a heart attack and ended up in the hospital. They couldn't explain it. And so that set in a little bit of anxiety. About a month later, my son's father filed for full custody of him. And he was taken away from me on false allegations. And so I didn't have my son. And then a couple months after that, I had a stroke. And then right after that, I had a broken arm. It was all within like a 5-month span. And I went from moving into a new house, having a boyfriend, having my son full time, having a good career, to being single, not having my son around, having a broken arm, not being able to work for the first time in my life. When I was pregnant with my son, I worked all the way up until 3 days before I had him, and I was only out of the shop for 2 weeks after it. That's the longest period before then that I had ever not tattooed. But last year, I didn't tattoo for 8 months out of the year.
Oh, wow.
There was 147 days that I didn't see my son or speak to him. Didn't even know if he was okay. I couldn't say goodnight. I couldn't hug him. Anything. At all. No contact. And that was, even to this day, everything bad that's ever happened to me, that was the lowest point of my life. The lowest. I felt so useless. I couldn't be a mom. I was financially dependent on my family, not knowing whether I was going to lose my house or not. I couldn't work, so I had all of my clients screaming and yelling at me that had deposits with me because I book a couple months in advance. So when I couldn't work anymore because my arm was broken, my clients were upset. They have $100 deposits with me, and I don't know when I'm going to be able to tattoo again. Because my heart was so sensitive after my stroke and my heart attack that they couldn't put me underneath anesthesia to fix my arm. So I had to wait for a surgeon in San Francisco to do my heart surgery before I could get my arm fixed. So I was out of work with a broken arm, and I was in pain 24/7 with no medications, just living with a broken arm the whole time until they could fix it. Every time I breathed, every time I moved, I was in pain. I was in emotional pain from not having my son around and being alone. Like, I had lost all hope. I couldn't even bathe myself. I couldn't make my own food. Like, I've been financially independent and on my own since I was 17. And it was the first time I'd ever had to ask anyone for help. And that's a big thing for me. Everybody in my life knows I don't ask for anything. I don't ask for help. If I can't do it myself, I don't deserve it. And so I was in such a dark place. I ended up getting into therapy because of it. Because I had a talk with my mom. I was like, if something does not change, I'm not going to make it through this custody battle. I'm not going to make it through this custody battle. I'm not going to make it through my heart surgery. I'm not going to make it through my arm surgery. Like, I didn't see any way out. Everything in my life had fallen apart in the matter of a couple of months. And that was when my mom would always say, it can't be bad forever. And that's honestly the phrase that got me through all of that, was it can't be this bad forever. Eventually it has to get better. Even waking up every day crying because I didn't have my son to wake me up and I couldn't go to work and I couldn't do anything, like, just remembering it can't be like that forever, and eventually it has to get better.
That's a lot to go through in a lifetime, much less 4 months or 5 months um, of going through something like that. So was that thought, it can't be this bad forever, was holding on to that one of the bigger things? Well, you said therapy as well, so I'm sure that was a big factor. But what were those things, and was there anything else that helped like pull you back to where you're at now today? Because that's a lot for things to be going so good and then to have it all kind of fall apart so fast. When it happens so fast like that, it's hard to kind of just find something to grasp onto to keep it from getting worse. So were those things the things that helped you move past it to get back to what you're doing today?
Um, Honestly, what helped me move past it was my family and my friends. The day that my son was taken from me, my grandma flew out here, and she stayed with me for 2 weeks. I couldn't even get out of bed. I was so upset. Like, I would just be screaming and crying, and she would bring me food and force me to eat. I didn't eat for the first 3 days that he was gone. I couldn't live with myself at that point. And so it was her and my friends coming over and checking on me. If it wasn't for them, like, knowing, like, okay, Tristan's gonna come over at this time, I have to be okay. I can at least get through until this time.
Mhm.
I can at least get through until Tristan gets here, or I can at least get through until my therapy appointment. Like, it was taking it day by day and just knowing, like, giving myself something to look forward to. Like, okay, my mom is coming on this day to bring me food. I have to be okay until then. And having those people to talk to and to just continuously tell me, like, you're going to get through this eventually. You don't deserve this. At the end of every hard time, something better comes out of it. And honestly, ever since all of that ended, life is completely different in the best way. Everything is great, honestly.
Yeah, no, that's really I love that advice of just getting through until your friend got it, or just getting through until your therapy appointment. Because when things seem so dark, and being in those moments myself of just saying, like, just get to this next thing, just survive 10 more minutes, survive 1 more hour, and something will help you survive a little bit longer. Like, being in those moments to get your mind to focus on that and say, get through this next little bit is so life changing, because it really does help you survive through those really, really dark times. Um, and then, like you just said, I love that you said that, through those really bad times, something better always comes out on the other side of it. And I think that's so important to remember. And so important to constantly remind people of, because, just knowing people that didn't make it out of those dark times, people that I've known that have lost their lives in those dark moments. Like, if we can just continue to remind people that it sucks and it feels like there's no other way out, but if you get to the other side of it, something great is going to happen. I think that's such a wonderful thing to continue to remind people of as we go through life. So I think that's a wonderful thing that you just pointed out there. But yeah, no, I mean, there's so much there, and you've been through a lot of different things in your life, and to see that happiness when you talk about your son, or you talk about your tattooing, is really awesome, because I think that's what we all want to try to get out of life, is something that we want to be doing, and chasing our dream, and seeing things happen like that. And so I think that's really wonderful that, even through those really dark moments in your life and through those really hard times, you're in a place right now where you can say life is amazing, right? You can say life is really good, and you're probably going to have some more bad days because that's life, right? But you're in that place to where you can do that. So as we kind of get close to the end of our conversation here, um, is there anything that you'd like to leave us with, whether it's any last words of advice or perspective or positivity or just something you have going on that you want to share about?
Honestly, just reiterating that it does get better. Things can't be bad forever, and even when they get good, there are going to be bad times, like you said, but the bad times help us appreciate the good. I feel like I couldn't appreciate anything that's going on right now in my life if I didn't go through all of those bad things last year and just throughout my life in general. Like, it makes you realize how you don't want to be and what you do want to be. And just focus on the positivity as well. Like, a positive mindset makes the biggest difference. Because you can sit there and say, oh, woe is me. Why are these terrible things happening to me? And when I was stuck in that mindset, they stayed terrible. But if you switch it up and say, okay, things are bad, but what can I do to fix it? Or what can I do in the meantime until the universe decides that it's done? But just getting through it, because there's always something better on the other side. There's always something better.
That's awesome. I love it. That's a great way to end and wrap up our conversation. So thank you, Alexa, again. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. I'm gonna share your link in the description, so definitely go check out Alexa's artwork. And if you're in California and need a tattoo, hit her up. um, and if you ever come to Michigan and you're gonna do some tattooing out here, let me know. Um, so, but no, go ahead.
Oh, no, you're good.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your time. Thank you again so much for coming on and doing this. It's been Illuminate, Navigate, Radiate. Have a great rest of your